All right, so welcome to the Planet 4 design call. This is the first of a series that we will be doing where we cover various different design topics. And if you have any ideas of different things that you might want to hear in the future, just let us know. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding your users through usability testing and user interviews. So for this call, we will start by a quick introduction. We did that with everyone in the chat, but we'll also introduce some of our Planet 4 team members. Then we'll get into understanding your users, talking about usability tests, user interviews, biases, conducting user research, and answer any questions that you might have. So facilitating the space. Due to different time zones, not everybody that is listed here is on this call, but we have Carol Romo. She is the Planet 4 design lead based in Mexico. Next one is myself. I am Taylor Kaus. I'm the Planet 4 UX designer, and I'm based in the Netherlands. We have Hussam, who is the Planet 4 UI designer based in Lebanon. Molly Marcotte, who is the Planet 4 data analyst based in Canada. Julia Torres, the HubSpot and Planet 4 community manager based in Brazil. And Tony Garcia, who is the Planet 4 product manager based in Taiwan, who is on the call with us today. So Carol, myself, and Hussam make up the Planet 4 design team. All right, so diving in, we're going to start by understanding your user. So understanding your user is crucial because it enables you to tailor your website to their needs and preferences, resulting in a more engaging and satisfying user experience. This understanding helps you to design intuitive interfaces through data-driven design decisions that align with user expectations. So today we will be talking about usability testing, which is used to evaluate the usability and effectiveness of a product, and user interviews, which are used to gain an understanding of a user's motivations, needs, and pain points. There are several different types of usability research out there, such as surveys, card sorting, observations, and A/B testing, among others, but today we'll specifically focus on usability testing and user interviews, starting by discussing usability testing. So what is usability testing? Usability testing is primarily focused on evaluating the usability and effectiveness of a product or system. So it aims to identify specific usability issues, assess how users interact with the product, and gather data on user performance, satisfaction, and task completion rates. Usability testing often involves tasks or scenarios for participants to complete while using the product. So there's several different times you might use usability testing. The first is if you're testing a prototype. So this is really an ideal test to use if you're assessing the usability of a specific prototype that you might have. You can also use it if you want to benchmark or compare designs. So this can help if you have different design iterations or variations and you really want to determine which one is better in terms of user satisfaction, task completion, and efficiency. And also when you want to gather quantitative data. So this can provide quantitative data such as task success rates, completion times, and these are really useful when you're making data-driven design decisions. And then finally, when you're iterating. So usability test is often conducted iteratively throughout the design and development process to identify and address issues at various stages. So it can be used throughout the process, whatever makes most sense for your goals. So there are two different types of usability tests. There's moderated and unmoderated. So in moderated usability testing, the test participant is presented with an interactive prototype and they're asked to share their screen so that the facilitator can observe their behavior. The facilitator guides them through tasks and asks follow-up questions. So this is typically done through Zoom or any other video call platform, but it can also be done in person as well. And you would use a moderated usability test when you need real-time interaction with participants to gather these insights. So when you want to observe their thought process and ask clarifying questions during the testing session. And then there's also unmoderated usability testing. This involves participants independently interacting with the website and providing feedback without real-time facilitation. So this can be done through usability testing sites such as Maze. And you would use unmoderated usability testing when you need to collect feedback from a larger and more geographically diverse group of participants, or maybe you have limited resources for real-time moderation, or you just want to test a product's usability in a more self-directed manner. So on this next section, we are going to be showing a 5-minute video that Carol and I recreated of an example of usability tests that we have conducted in the past with real users. So I will go ahead and play this and then let me know if you can't hear it, but hopefully you can.
This is an example of a real usability test scenario. I will be demonstrating the role of the interviewer and Taylor will be demonstrating the role of the participant. We will only show a small snippet of the test, but in an actual test, I would start with more information in the introduction and other general questions that are relevant to our goals and objectives. With that, I will get started. Hi, thank you for agreeing to participate in this call. Your insight is very valuable to us and will help us to inform our redesign process of our website. We will start by asking you a few questions and then we'll share a link and ask you to share your screen with us. We will be running you through a couple of scenarios and we would like to have you walk us through how you would go about completing various tasks. We're not testing you on anything, but rather testing our design. So please feel free to be very open with us and share your thoughts honestly. There are no wrong answers. Before we get started, would you be okay with us recording?
Yes.
Okay. This will be only used by our team, so and it's only to ensure that we can analyze the results. So before we get started, do you have any questions for me?
No.
Cool. Okay. So can you please share your screen and open the link I just sent in the chat?
Yes.
Okay. So before we walk you through these specific scenarios, I would like to ask you to look at the page you're on. You may scroll, but please don't click on anything. What would be the first thing you do or look at on this page?
The menu is the first thing that I noticed. I would then scroll down to see what's there.
Can you please tell me what you think this page is?
I think that this is the homepage. This is what I would expect a homepage to look like.
Okay. And does anything catch your attention?
Oh, I like the icons. And the homepage is my favorite because of how it is organized. It has everything. I can always come back to the homepage if I wanted to find something.
Next, I'm going to ask you to respond to the following. I will read out loud and I will be asking you to walk me through what you would do. Please note that this is a prototype, so there may be some items that do not work. Please verbalize your thought process along the way. Imagine that you have come to the Greenpeace website to learn something new. You recently heard something about deforestation and thought Greenpeace might be a good resource for learning more about the problem. Please guide us through your process out loud of how you would go about learning about deforestation. After you've learned more about this, you would like to see what you can do to help on this issue. Find at least one thing you'd be interested in doing to help.
Okay. So I would start by clicking on Get Informed because I would expect that this is where the issues Greenpeace works on are located. So under here, I see forest. And I imagine deforestation is going to be there. So I click on forest. Okay, so I think I would just start by scrolling through and reading things on the page. The content is good. Let's see. I think I would like something to be able to scroll to the top more easily. But then I would continue scrolling up. Oh, I see here stopping deforestation. So since I want to learn more about that, I would go ahead and click on that. And right at the top, I already see that I could take an action, but I'm curious to see what else is here. So I would start by also scrolling and reading through what's on here. And I see on this section, there are different things that I can do. So I would probably read through all of these, and then I would go ahead and sign the first petition.
Okay. And what if you wanted to learn more about other actions that you could take beyond what's offered here?
So I remember earlier in the menu, I saw take action. So I was curious what was behind that. So I would just go up and click on that. Okay. I think again, I would just scroll and look. Oh, there's a lot of actions here. Act daily. That's really nice. Something I was looking for. Cool. I feel like I can do a lot of things here. There are a lot of different actions and different degrees of things that I could get involved with. I don't know what I would expect by the filter though.
What do you mean?
Well, I see here there's the start your campaign, which is something I'd be interested in, but I would be scared on filtering anything here in case that might go away, and I'm just not sure what I would expect there. But overall, this is a really nice page. And yeah, I like what I've seen here. Right, so that was a video demonstration of just a portion of a usability test. We're not going to get into the exact details on this call today with this test itself, but more so we're going to get into the process so that you can follow something similar. So, oops, okay. All right, so how did we get here? We started with step one, identifying pain points and questions. So through a series of qualitative and quantitative research, we uncovered users' biggest pain points and questions to address those pain points. So our team started by conducting a variety of research from surveys to data analysis on Google Analytics and more to determine the main pain points. And we had discovered that a low use of the navigation bar, users being confused by the website structure, and users having trouble finding the right content were some of our main pain points. So with that in mind, we wrote down a series of questions that could help us uncover if our new design solution was going to address these pain points that we had previously discovered. So we wanted to answer which navigation components are utilized, which ones go unnoticed or are avoided. Do users click on the primary navigation menu, and how? How easy is it for users to identify where they are on the website? And how do they navigate to learn about different topics? And what type of content do they expect behind a category or tag link? So then next we had developed our testing plan. So as step two, after identifying what pain points and questions we wanted to figure out, okay, what is going to be the most appropriate method for us here? We then determined the scope, the approach, the success metrics, the timeline, the medium, the recruitment plan, tools, and a follow-up plan. After that, we went to write the script. So using the pain points and the questions as a basis, we imagined several scenarios that would take users through our site, hitting the pages, the elements, etc., that we wanted to observe and create a script with. So for designing our script, we set out our purpose. So our purpose was to test navigation. We wanted to do this on both desktop and mobile with users who have come to the Greenpeace homepage to browse and explore the site and learn something new. So this was one test. We set up several tests, but this is one test, and this is the one that we showed a bit of in our example. And then we had several tasks that we wanted to explore as well. So we wanted to have the user explore the homepage. We wanted them to learn more about deforestation and several others. So those were the two that we discussed, but we had several different tasks related to this particular test. And then once we had identified that, we broke down each test in a table. So we started with a starting point. So thinking about where do we want the user to begin this test? And we had this on different pages for different tests. And in this one, we had it on the home page. From there, we set up a scenario that would take the user through the website, hitting on all the different tasks that we identified. After that, we created a high-level task route, so where they start and where they may end, and then the assumed pathway. So this is typically the users are not going to follow the assumed pathway, or not every user, but this is good just so that the person who's running this test has kind of an idea of like where they might go. Where do you think they're going to navigate through? So that is how we created the script. And then after that, we moved on to recruiting the participants. So this step can be done in tandem with step 3, as it usually takes some time. And you can determine how you will recruit participants, whatever way works best for you, and then schedule those tests. All right, so Molly is not able to be on this call today, but she joined yesterday and made a recording. So I'm going to go ahead and show her video from yesterday.
Hi everyone, my name is Molly. If we haven't met yet, I'm the data analyst for the Planet 4 team. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there today in person for this community call, but it's like 2 o'clock in the morning where I am, so hopefully I am sound asleep right now. But I wanted to record this video to talk about participant recruitment when it comes to usability studies. So once you have your testing plan and your script, it's time to actually find people to participate. This can be internal or external participants, or a mix of both, depending on what the goals are that you've identified and the perspectives that you need. Internal participants, so people who work for Greenpeace, are definitely much easier to recruit since you can use your personal network or just send a Slack message. And they can offer a unique insight that external participants wouldn't have since they have experience with the organization. But because of that experience, when it comes to testing, they would be fairly biased. So I want to focus more on the external participants, since they can offer a very important perspective, but are a little bit more challenging to recruit. There's a few different ways that you could go about this. You could look through social media and put a call out there asking for volunteers. You could contact Greenpeace volunteers directly and ask if they'd be willing to help out. Or you could go through a third-party organization that can match you with testers, but that would likely cost money. What we did with Planet 4 when we did our usability testing and user interviews is we used an on-site survey that was already being used to survey users to find people who are willing to go that extra step and sit down and do an actual user interview. So I'll walk through how we did that in a second, but before we do that, I want to add a quick note on sample sizing. You've probably heard me say before with quantitative research that a typical rule of thumb is 10% of the total population. In qualitative research, this is very different. With qualitative research, the sample size is determined by the point at which saturation is reached. So what that means is when you're doing tests or interviews, in the beginning, you get a lot of different themes and insights coming out of it. But after a certain point, doing more interviews doesn't provide you with much new insight. It's just the same themes coming up over and over again. And so because of that, a general rule of thumb for qualitative research is 3 to 7 participants is a commonly recommended sample size, which is much easier to get than 10% if you only need 3 to 7 people. So moving on to how we actually did this. We were using Hotjar to survey users about navigation of the Greenpeace International website. And if you've used Hotjar before, it's likely for some analytics or their heat map functionality, but they also have a really awesome survey feature that allows you to collect feedback from users as they go through your website. You can create a new survey specifically for gathering research participants. And if you do that, then you could filter based on different characteristics. Like if you want to get a certain amount of people who are a certain age or from a specific part of the world, then you could add multiple choice questions that allow them to identify where they would fall and then reach out to participants that way. And you would just add at the end a place for them to identify their name, their email address, and if they're willing to participate. You could also just add it as into an already existing survey that you have, like as like a at the very end, hey, would you be willing to participate in some user interviews or whatever it is that you're testing? And if they say yes, then give them a spot to add in their name, their email, their contact information, and you can reach out to them. I've also seen people kind of get fancy with it and include a Calendly link so that the participant could book directly with the person who wanted to interview them, which was really cool. So I've seen it done all 3 ways. They all have different benefits. It just depends on what you want to do with your participants and what you want available on your site. So let's take this opportunity to do a quick walkthrough of what it looks like in Hotjar to actually create a survey. When you first log into Hotjar, this is what you should see. Aside from the error up top, I'm using a test site, so hopefully you won't have that. But this is typically what your dashboard would look like. And if you go to the left down at the bottom, there's a little tab for surveys. Click on that and you'll see all of your active surveys and all of your past surveys. If you want to start from scratch, then you would go up to the top right and click on New Survey, and there you'll be greeted with a bunch of different templates. You can use one that already exists and edit it to fit your needs, or you could start from scratch. There's also an AI tool. I've never used that before. It might work great. It might not work at all, so feel free to try it out. But for today, we're going to start from scratch. And it will prompt you to name your survey and give it a description. And then you can choose the type. So as you click a type, it'll show you a preview. There is popover, which is like your standard pop-up on a website down in the right-hand corner. You could do a button off to the side. You could embed it directly. You could do full screen if you really want to make sure they fill out your survey. Or you could do a link, which is really useful for gathering internal participants. If you want them to fill out the same survey that the external ones are, then you can get a link and send that directly. But for this one, we're going to do a popover. The next step is to add your questions. So there's all different types of questions available. There is a long answer text, short answer text. You probably want to do short answer text if you're asking people their name and their email, their phone number, things like that. So I will do name, and you can see a little preview of what it looks like off to the side. So it will pop up and it will show, oh, where did it go? Name. Yeah, there we go. So it shows exactly what it looks like there. You could also do radio buttons, which would what you would see for a typical multiple choice question. So if you wanted to know their age, then you could add that in, and then 15 to 24, and so on and so forth. So there's all different types of questions that you can experiment with. You could add images if you wanted, and then you can order your questions in whatever order you want just by dragging and dropping. So it pretty much walks you through it, which is really nice. And then they have question banks as well that you can pick from. The next thing, once you have all your questions, is it will ask you to customize the appearance. So you can make it whatever color you want, whatever makes sense with your website. And you can choose where it's positioned, on the right or the left. And you can add a logo if you want. The next piece is targeting. So you can choose whether or not you want to target specific devices, what pages you want your survey to pop up on, whether that's the home page or if they get, deep into your website and you want to survey them, then you can pick. You can also use specific users based on different attributes, and you can pick the amount of traffic that you want covered. So all sorts of ways that you can customize it. You can also choose whether or not the survey will load immediately when the page loads, or after a delay, or when the user does a specific behavior, like if they're about to leave the page, and how frequent that the survey comes up for the user. So if you want them to fill it out more than once, or just until they've submitted a response, or whatever that is. Then you can choose where you want the responses to go. By default, Hotjar will just store them, but you could also send them to an email. You could send them to Excel or Slack, whatever it is you want. Then it'll give you a summary, and you can create your survey. I didn't fill everything in, so I don't have the option to do that, but once you're done, you will. And then it will be up on your website for everyone to see. If you want to see an example of this right now live on Greenpeace International has one up that they're doing to test their new information architecture and the new brand identity. So you can see what that looks like when you go to their site and kind of get an idea of how it's already being used within the organization. But just by adding a couple questions, you can get possible participants for your usability testing. So with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help with survey development or general Hotjar questions, anything like that. My Slack inbox is always open. And with that, I will pass it back to Taylor to talk about actually conducting the tests. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
All right, so really useful call or session for Molly. And let's see, okay. So after recruiting the participants, then the next step is to actually conduct those tests. So using whatever your preferred medium is, you can conduct those tests with your participants. Ideally, it would be great if you can have another person on the call to take notes. That is usually really helpful. And then we typically ask if recording is okay, because then you can go back to the exact script and have the entire thing there for analysis. So that's really useful as well. And then the final step is analyzing your data. So there are several different methods to analyze data. You can use whatever your preferred method is, whatever makes most sense for you and your goals. And that will really help you to uncover usability issues, challenges, and a plan for how you would like to address these. So as I mentioned, there are several different types of data analysis tools and techniques that you can use. This is just what we use. So we are showing this as an example, but there are many, many others out there. So we use something called affinity mapping. So affinity mapping is a technique used to organize and categorize data by grouping related items together to reveal patterns and insights. So essentially what we did is we had the full script from all of the different user or usability tests that we had done. And we grouped them by color. So participant was linked to a color. This is one of the several tests that we did. And then we started grouping them to areas that made sense. And this can go through several iterations as well. So for example, maybe you start grouping things like homepage. So every time that somebody mentions something related to the homepage or an action or behavior they did on the homepage, you can group it there. But then you can go through a second round and maybe you start noticing that there is a navigation issue that's present on the homepage, but you're also noticing that on several pages. And now you've created a new grouping for that. So that's just a little bit of the process, very high level, but what we did with affinity mapping. And it's a really useful tool. It's a really good visualization of the tests as well. And you can start to really find those insights. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, we only use the usability test video example to demonstrate what a usability test can look like, and then showing you the process to get you there as well. But we didn't go into all of the details. So if you do want to learn more about that specific usability test and what went into that for the information and information architecture and navigation project, we do have a link at the end of this. But for the purpose of this call, we are just going to go over the high-level findings in a way that just shows you what you can find from a usability test for an example. So yeah, if you want to learn more, we'll have that link, but this will just be showing you what kind of things we took away from that. So for us in our test that we had conducted, all users were able to complete all of the tasks that we laid out in the scenarios. They were able to successfully navigate away from and to specific pages with a varied number of steps to get there. Users indicated that the site was clean, clear, intuitive, well-organized, and easy to use. All of the navigation elements we wanted to test were utilized, but users had mixed expectations around the secondary navigation behavior. So that was something that prompted us to look into further after these tests were done. Desktop users largely knew where they were on the site, but it was a little more difficult for mobile users. So another thing we wanted to look into. We found that users needed more indicators to understand where they were on the site, especially on mobile, and they needed more guidance and more options to learn throughout the site. So at this point is when you would make a plan for how do you tackle these items. And from there, you can go ahead and make the necessary changes and test again and see if those improvements are working to make your site more usable. You could do this several different times. So that was the process for us with our usability test. All right, so we just talked about usability testing, and now we are going to get into user interviews. So user interviews are used to gain an understanding of a user's motivations, needs, and pain points. So what exactly are they? User interviews are focused on gathering in-depth insights into a user's needs, motivations, behaviors, and opinions. These interviews aim to understand a user's experiences, preferences, and pain points. They are more open-ended and exploratory and allow participants to express their thoughts and feelings about a product or their needs and goals. So by engaging with users, you can really uncover valuable information that quantitative data alone cannot reveal. And user interviews really gives you that deeper understanding of the user's perspective, and it allows you to clarify any ambiguous findings or explore unexpected insights. So when might you use user interviews? You could use them at the early stages of a new design or a prototype. This is where you can really dive into what are the user's needs, pain points, and preferences. They also allow for open-ended conversations that can reveal aspects of the user experience that might not be immediately evident through usability testing alone. So this could be emotional reactions, decision-making processes, and the broader context. They also provide qualitative data. So this includes user stories, narratives, anecdotes, and these all offer a deeper understanding of a user's perspective and experiences. And then finally, at the iterative design stage, so various stages, you can gather feedback on existing prototypes and you can inform the iterative design decisions. So just like usability testing, these can be used throughout the entire process, whatever is making most sense for you and your goals. So moving on to planning and preparation. So you want to start by defining your research objectives. So clarifying those, what are your objectives? What are your goals for this user interview? What insights or information are you seeking to gather? What problems or questions do you want to address? And then next, you want to identify your target audience. So you want to determine the group of users or participants that are most relevant to your research. With user interviews, you can actually create user personas to understand your target audience as well and better understand their characteristics, needs, and goals. But in any user interview, you want to identify that target audience. So then moving on to developing an interview script. So you want to create a structured discussion guide and interview script that outlines the topics and questions you want to cover during the interview. So this should be flexible enough to allow for natural conversation, but structured enough to ensure you cover key points. You want to cover those key topics related to your research objectives. And you want to be prepared to ask follow-up questions and probes that really dig deeper into a participant's responses. These can help you to uncover hidden insights that you might not have known otherwise. And then finally, pilot testing. So before conducting formal interviews, and this is also relevant for usability tests, consider pilot testing with a small group. This really helps to identify any issues you might have had with wording, clarity, or just like the general flow of the test or interview. So some important considerations, you want to start the interview with some warm-up questions to really help the participant feel comfortable. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to really balance that structure with flexibility. So while it is important that you have somewhat of a structured guide, you also want to be flexible enough that you can allow for unexpected insights or topics to emerge during natural conversation. You want to ask some open-ended questions. So this should encourage participants to provide details and qualitative responses. So try to avoid asking yes and no questions and instead like how and why, questions that really dig deeper into their thoughts and experiences. You want to prioritize critical questions, especially if you don't have enough time. So set out what questions are most important for you if you don't have time to answer everything. And then you want to consider wording and biases. So use a clear and concise language in your questions to avoid ambiguity and be careful not to lead participants or bias their responses. So next we'll talk about bias in user research. So this relates to all user research. So not just user interviews or usability tests, but any sort of user research that you might be doing. So bias in user research can be consciously or subconsciously letting one's assumptions, beliefs, values, and prejudices enter the research at any stage, which can undermine the validity of the research and can result in inaccurate insights. So there are several different types of biases, and we've included a few here. So starting with anchoring bias. So anchoring bias occurs when people rely too much on pre-existing information or the first information they find when making decisions. So for example, let's say a researcher is looking to understand user satisfaction on a scale from 1 to 10. But first they show this new participant an example of somebody in the past who gave a previous testimonial. They were extremely satisfied. They gave a 9 out of 10. Well, now that participant is likely to be influenced by seeing that testimonial, and they might just adjust their rating upwards, even if they weren't that satisfied. Next is confirmation bias. So this is when researchers seek out or interpret data that confirms their expectations or aligns with their own hypotheses and beliefs. So, for example, if a researcher believes that their site is well designed and user-friendly, during usability testing, they might just focus on the positive user interactions and ignore any negative feedback, interpreting it as a user error or an isolated incident. All right, and then we have response bias. So this is when participants change their responses to align with perceived expectations and what they think is desirable. They might feel uncomfortable reporting their honest answer, which will lead to inaccurate data. Next, we have cultural bias. So cultural bias is when the researcher judges a participant's behaviors or responses based on their own culture. An example of this could be an English-speaking researcher assuming a participant who is a non-native English speaker may be comfortable speaking in English. They might not be. And if they are not, this could impact the participant's ability to express themselves fully, leading to incomplete insights. So there are several different biases out there. We've just selected a handful for this presentation. And for each individual bias, there are individual ways that you can minimize that risk specifically. But for the purpose of this presentation, we just highlighted some overarching ways that you can reduce risk overall. So the first is self-awareness and reflection. So as humans, we all have some form of biases or assumptions, which is used for reducing brain load to make efficient decisions. So this means that we need to be aware of what these biases are and the way that they negatively impact our processes and what we can do about this. So a resource that we linked at the end of this presentation is from Project Implicit. This is a nonprofit that educates the public about biases. And they have online tests where you can take and actually determine what your own biases are. So it's really interesting. And then next is to clearly define your goals. So having clear research goals defined ahead of time helps you to have a clear framework, make sure that you're selecting the appropriate research methods, and also allows the researcher to maintain objectivity. Next, you want to make sure that you really have a diverse participant selection. So making sure that you have different participants from different backgrounds, cultures, and experiences makes sure that the data is more inclusive and comprehensive. You also want to use qualitative and quantitative methods. This really allows you to cross-validate your findings, and both types of data help to give context to the other. And then lastly, you want to seek feedback from colleagues and participants as you go through the process to learn more about gaps, potential biases, areas to improve, and just be open to iterating and changing to make it better. All right, so as a recap, we've discussed user interviews and usability tests. Both of these can be used hand in hand if that makes sense for your goals. You can do, a bit of your test as a usability test, and then you can switch to a user interview or vice versa. But you can also do them completely separate. As mentioned, it all just depends on what you're seeking to get out of this. So how are they different? So user interviews, the purpose is to generate new knowledge about your users, their experiences, needs, and pain points. Whereas usability tests are used to assess a design, how it performs, what's not working, and why. For user interviews, they are attitudinal, so you are collecting participants' reported behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. Whereas in usability tests, they are behavioral, and you are directly observing how a user interacts with a design. For user interviews, this is typically at the emphasizing stage of design thinking, and usability test is at the testing stage of design thinking. But as I mentioned earlier, these can be at different processes. These are just where they typically are. For user interviews, the design is absent. So they are not reviewing a design or trying out a design. And in usability tests, they are directly interacting with a design. So I've linked some resources here. We have what are usability tests and what are user interviews 101. Those are really useful. They have a lot of different information that really dives deeper into what I've discussed today. We have a link for how many participants you should recruit. We have a link to Hotjar for recruiting those participants if that is something that you want to use. And we have the Medium article where we really dive into what we did for that usability test. So how we tested the new Planet 4 information architecture and navigation. As I mentioned about biases, we have Project Implicit. And finally, we have writing your usability test script and your interview guide guidelines and examples. So really useful things there as well. And finally, we have an option for you to participate in your own user research if you would like to. So right now, we are working on creating user personas across Planet 4. So the Planet 4 team is working on this. And this includes user personas of Greenpeace's front-end users. So since there are so many different NROs in different countries, cultures, languages, we alone cannot interview enough front-end users. So we have included a few pictures here of what we mean by user personas. These are fictional representations of a target audience created to help better understand a user's needs, goals, and behaviors. These are just examples. This doesn't mean this is how we're going to create these, but just so you kind of have an idea what we mean when we say user personas. So this is where you could come in. So if you are interested in conducting your own user research with your own front-end users to learn more about who these users are, what their needs are, their pains, their goals, we can provide training, a user interview guide, and information on how to recruit these participants and set up and conduct these interviews yourself. So this would give you insight into your own users, and it would also give us insight into who the Planet 4 front-end users are across Greenpeace. So if this is something you think you might be interested in, please feel free to, I'm going to post this in the link real quick. Feel free to sign up, and this is just to indicate your interest. So if you sign up here, we will share more information. And if you are still interested and available, we will have a plan for that. So yeah, feel free to sign up. And if you have any questions, let us know. And that is it for the presentation.